Well, this is going to be a fun one today. Welcome back to Seahawks Forever. I'm Dan. Today, my special guest, Jacson Bevens of the outstanding Cigar Thoughts podcast, longtime writer of the Cigar Thoughts column, which he retired after last season. And while we were recording this, Cooper Kupp agreed to a 3-year contract with your Seattle Seahawks, total max value from the agent of $45 million. We'll see how the structure lands. But we got to react to this live while we were recording in the moment. You're going to want to see that. We also get Jackson's thoughts on all the moves the Seahawks have made this offseason. He had a very emotional response to the Geno Smith and DK Metcalf trades at the time. He always has such great perspective, though, from a wide angle view on what's going on with the Seahawks, and he does so again today. But the biggest thing is a reaction to the Kupp news. You get to see that coming up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Doer is built for doing lifestyle apparel for every occasion. And if you go to shopdoer.com, you can check out everything they have. That's spelled D-U-E-R. But my go-to right here every single day, these stretch performance jeans, they are incredibly comfortable. 20% stretch woven through them. Sustainable materials, antibacterial, and breathable materials as well. And right now, you can get 20% off your first order for being a viewer of this program. Go to shopdoer.com/forever. That's shopdoer, DUER.com/forever for 20% off your first order. Doer is built for doing. All right, you guys, as I said, breaking news today, Cooper Kupp is a Seahawk. How do you feel about that? A little bit better about the wide receiver room. We discuss in detail, Jackson and I. And then also, of course, taking a look at the moves the Seahawks have made over the last week and also what could be done still about the offensive line. News from Adam Schefter today that Tevin Jenkins will indeed be visiting Seattle on Monday. Can they get him locked up? How would that make you feel about the offseason as a whole? We break all that down, Jackson and I as well. Before we get to this interview, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that bell for notification of future episodes. All the other ways you can support me and the channel are linked down below in the description. All right, let's get into this. Jacson Bevens of Cigar Thoughts. All right, Jackson, it's been a while. A couple of things have happened since the last time you and I talked. I didn't make a bunch of notes or do a bunch of prep for today. I just want to be able to have a conversation with you. And I just want to start out this way. Okay. How are you doing?
Oh man, I'm golden. I'm so fortunate to have the life that I do, and the Seahawks stuff. I mean, it's fun. It's fun to, dive into it and have strong feelings about it. But, they can't hurt me. They're trying this offseason, but they can't really hurt me. Yeah, man, I'm doing okay. I'm doing my best to let the rest of the dominoes fall and give some benefit of the doubt. But been giving this front office the benefit of the doubt for a long time, and this is the first offseason where I've had real trouble doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always known you to be someone who leaned towards the positive and the optimistic. I was a little worried about you after some of this news broke. It's just, like we were saying before I hit record, like we've analyzed all of these moves individually over the last year or 2 years just because they're a topic. The last time Geno was extended, the last time DK was extended, should you trade him? Is their value more as a resource than it is, or as an asset than as a player? But to have them all happen in such a short amount of time, even looking back on when Russell Wilson was traded and Bobby Wagner was released on the same day, like I don't think there's ever been a stretch of 7 or 8 days like this. This is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the organization, whether that's John Schneider in the front office or the ownership or them in tandem or Mike McDonald, but it really feels like they're trying to slam the door on the Pete Carroll era. There's no one left, really, you know, like of the meaningful contributors under Pete Carroll, there is no one left. And it's hard to see that as accidental.
How much do you believe John and Mike when they talk about how blindsided they were by this Geno thing, that they were fully expecting moving forward with him in 2025 and that this caught them off guard?
I don't really believe them. If they were really caught off guard by them, that makes me worry even more about how in tune they are to the situation in the current market. Like, this was no surprise. Geno Smith started talking about a contract extension the previous year.
Yeah.
If there was no ongoing conversation to the point where you are stunned by him turning down $35 to $40 million, that actually makes me more worried.
Yeah.
So no, I don't think they're telling the truth on that particular thing, which GMs have to lie all the time. So I'm not like judging them if that's the case.
Right. Yeah, they all do. And I agree with you because the swiftness with which they pivoted to Sam Darnold, they had mapped this out, right? They planned for all these contingencies. What if this happens, that happens? What if they all happen? And so they do plan that out. And I do think that they, in a sense, I mean, how many dominoes had to fall for this to happen? Like, I'm sure you'd agree with this statement because everyone seems to be on the same page with this. If Pete Carroll's sitting at home right now, if he doesn't get back in the league this year, like we're having a different conversation. Like, so that opportunity had to be there. And then the fact that Sam Darnold was available, like quarterbacks like him just usually don't hit free agency. I can't even, where would we be today if Sam Darnold hadn't have been a free agent and Geno had demanded this and they had to trade him? Like, you talk about panic, like the sky would be falling. Because what are the other options?
Well, you just don't trade your really good quarterback that you already have. Like, that's the thing. I don't really buy that Geno is like, I'm out of here no matter what. Like,
right.
Come on, man. The guy's been trying to get extended for over a year. And, Schneider said, I believe today, that, he knew or made reference to the fact they knew what Geno's number was because that happened on March 1st. Right? Geno's agent, his camp, whatever. They gave that $45 million a year number 2 weeks ago. And they didn't try to keep him, which is fine. Like, if you don't think Geno's your guy for some reason, or he's not worth it at the age and the money and all of that stuff, okay, that's fine. Shop him. You made one phone call. One phone call.
Yeah, Pittsburgh had to be, interested.
I mean,
you would think on some level.
I am sure there were plenty of teams interested. I could not imagine that there was only one team that is willing to pay Geno Smith, because I think teams are going to be much better at considering context when looking at Geno's numbers. And every single front office has analytics departments now. Like, it's not like there's some analytical front offices like there were, 15, 20 years ago, and some that weren't. Like, they all have it now. If it's not driving the car, it's at least front row passenger. So they know what Geno is. And to not even, I mean, shit, trade him to the Raiders, but like, get some competition in there. Drive that price up. I just, you say quarterbacks like Sam Darnold don't usually hit free agency. And I guess it just comes down to what you think of Sam Darnold, because I think that you have an extremely pressure sensitive quarterback that played without quick pressure for the first time in his career and was really good until the end when he was under pressure. And then they scored 9 points in consecutive games. And he set an NFL record for sacks taken in a playoff game. Like, I'm not convinced that Sam Darnold isn't just the next Case Keenum or Nick Foles that stepped into a situation that was unintended, thrived as the unexpected starter, and then went on with the rest of their career and never came close to that again.
But it's pretty clear they view Darnold as a worthy pivot option, right? So in your mind, then, if he's not available at that point, he's not an option, and the free agent market is everything else, right? Because I don't see anyone else on that list that would have had any appeal to him. Do you think, absent of that, do they in an alternate revisionist history sort of scenario, do they just play hardball and just call his bluff and just not
That's
do
the thing.
anything?
He was still under contract
Right.
for this year. Like
Right.
you didn't have to trade him. And okay, they didn't want to do the stare down. That's fine. That's fine. None of us wanted that, right? But I mean, I would have been perfectly fine if Sam Darnold wasn't available. First of all, I'd be very okay with that. Secondly, I'd be perfectly fine with giving Justin Fields what the Jets gave him. That's essentially a 1 year, $30 million deal. Like your hands aren't tied by that. So that's how I would have pivoted if A, Darnold wasn't available. Actually, I'm going to say that's B. If A, you felt like you absolutely were never going to be able to extend Geno even a year from now, and you had to trade him, then yeah, Fields, I think I would have been fine with the deal Fields got. Beyond that, though, I mean, yeah, it gets really tough. No interest in Russ or Rodgers or anything like that.
Right. Yeah. Thank goodness. All right. That caused some sleepless hours for me the night that the report came out that the Seahawks wanted to talk to Aaron Rodgers. I just like, come on, what kind of nightmare scenario is this?
Well, here's the thing. Like, I'm even setting aside whatever people might think. I mean, I know in the Pacific Northwest, as a populace, at least west of the mountains, we tend to lean a certain way, and that leads to a consensus opinion of Aaron Rodgers. I'm saying throwing all that off the field shit out the window. I don't care what you feel about him. It is hard to overstate how bad at football he was last year.
Yeah.
He went to the Jets and had a worse record and scored fewer points per game than Zach Wilson did with the Jets.
Yeah.
And now he's a year older. So like, even without the baggage, I'm not interested. With the baggage, absolutely not.
Now, with how you feel about Sam Darnold and what his ceiling might be, are you hoping that they target a quarterback at some point in the draft coming up next month?
Not this year. I mean, sure, take your day 3 shot at Tyler Shuck, but he's probably going to go earlier.
Yeah,
they're using like 18 on Jackson Dart. They better fucking get that one right. My frustration isn't just that they traded Geno Smith and DK Metcalf. It's the timing. It's this year. It is the QB landscape is so bleak that Sam Darnold was clearly the best option.
Right.
Outside of, Cam Ward, probably, which you're not going to be able to get. Next year, like, just roll it forward with Geno one more year. He's under contract, shift some guaranteed money around, do whatever you got to do, and then attack it next year. But to put yourself in this position, coming off a 10-win season with the Niners being stripped for parts, the Cardinals haven't stopped tripping over their own dicks in 25 years.
Yeah.
So it's just you and the Rams that you just lost to on a 5th tiebreaker. And now is when you're going to do this? When your best option is Sam Darnold? That's what kills me.
I think I feel better about some of the quarterback possibilities in this draft than you do, but that's always me trying to find a positive, right? And I think in the landscape, what it is now in college football with NIL and transfers and everything else, it's so hard to predict a year out. It's really, really hard to say, well, they should have waited till next year, because we don't know. Like all these fans that think that tanking for Arch Manning's the thing to do. I don't think Manning comes out next year with 1 year as a starter when you can get paid $3, $4, $5 million.
Great point. It's a great point.
I don't think he comes out next year. So you don't want to tank for something so uncertain. It's not like in the old days where it's like, okay, the guy's, after his sophomore redshirt year, he's coming out no matter what. It's a tougher landscape to sort of navigate. And just
absolutely
plays into the uncertainty of the whole thing.
No, it's a great point. I'm glad you brought it up, and it gives me an opportunity to clarify that last statement. And I know I feel this way. I've been very outspoken about it on my show, in my articles, on Twitter and Blue Sky. I am not a fan of tanking. It doesn't work. Like, it just doesn't work.
Agreed.
And you can point to a couple of instances of teams that successfully did a tank job. But the overwhelming majority of the teams that pick in the top 5 are picking in the top 5 and the top 10 again and again and again and again. And then you're wasting the affordable years of the draft picks that you do hit. So I'm not saying like tank and go get whatever. I'm just saying I am going to assume that next year's quarterback class is going to be deeper than this year's quarterback class, because this is probably the second shallowest quarterback class of my adult life behind the Kenny Pickett season. So just the clear odds are you're going to have a chance, if you're drafting in the middle of the first round, to either take a quarterback that you like or trade up not all the way to number 1 to take a quarterback that you like. And I would much rather have the team be in that position after one more year of Geno Smith or 1 year of Justin Fields than they are by committing to Sam Darnold. Now, at least, it's 3 years, $100 million. That's agent speak. Really, to me, it's a 2 year, $55 million transaction. Yeah. And so, I mean, they're not like married to him, but I just think from outside looking in, there are better options. What do you got there?
We have breaking news from Adam Schefter. Former Super Bowl MVP Cooper Kupp reaches agreement on a 3-year deal with the Seattle Seahawks.
Hey, all right.
Let's talk about, I wanted to talk about DK, but you know what? Breaking news is breaking news, even though this is a recorded episode. Your thoughts on Cooper Kupp and the fit in Seattle?
Great fit. If he can stay healthy, I love that. I mean, he's not the way that Cooper Kupp wins is not the way that Julio Jones won, right? Because that cliff hit. It's not the way that DeAndre Hopkins won when that cliff hit. He wins the way Adam Thielen wins. He wins the way that Keenan Allen wins. Yeah. It's like having a mid-range jumper in the NBA. Like, that skill set lasts a long time. And when Cooper Kupp's been healthy, he's been very, very productive. You can play him inside. You can play him outside. We've seen that Jackson Smith and Jigba can play inside and outside. Yeah. I think these are very complementary skill sets. And I think with Clint Kubiak, you're going to be seeing a lot more 12 personnel, and meaning, 2 receivers on the field instead of 3. And so if your 2 receivers are Jackson Smith and Jigba and Cooper Kupp, like, you could do a lot worse. That is going to make things easier for Sam Darnold.
And with what he does well, his skill set operating, especially in the middle of the field, as we've saw all too well over the last 8 years, as much as Kubiak likes to use 12 and 13, I can even see a scenario where he can essentially play sort of in those tight formations and almost take one of those tight end spots, if you will, and almost play like a Y tight end would, where you're just operating in the middle of the field. And surprisingly, we talked about this just for a minute before I hit record. I was looking back at his injury history, because my perception was it was a lot of groin and hamstring and quad and, soft tissue stuff that really becomes a concern if those things become chronic. It really wasn't. His biggest issues the last 2 years in particular have been ankle sprains. And last year was a high ankle. And your answer to that was, these guys are always hurt. Like, think about, now he's a year older than when Doug Baldwin's career ended, but Baldwin was always banged up, always hurt, but he relied on a similar skill set to what you're talking about. He's not a guy that could take the top off, right? And he was a guy that got great release off the line of scrimmage, knew how to position his body, could catch contested balls. I think, first of all, he's just one of the coolest players to follow in the NFL over the last 7 or 8 years if you're from the Pacific Northwest. Like, watching him, I'm a Coug, so I watched him destroy us, and beat a Mike Leach coached WSU team in Pullman when he was at Eastern Washington. He caught about 1,000 catches in that game for about 50 touchdowns. We saw that one of the greatest years of receivers ever put together when the Rams won the Super Bowl. And, the fact that he's coming home and he might still have some left in the tank, we'll have to see what the structure of the contract is. But given that it's a 3-year deal, you have to anticipate there's some protections, right, for the Seahawks in the event he can't stay healthy. And there's probably a pretty low year 1 cap hit. Like, they're just doing what John Schneider likes to do and hedging every position so they can go into the draft kind of untethered and uninhibited and be able to let the board come to him.
He likes to hedge almost every draft or every position.
So far, the hedges seem to be of a much higher caliber of player than what we saw him do last year.
Yeah, I liked the DeMarcus Lawrence signing. I think that's a very reasonable gamble at $18 million guaranteed. I don't know if you have the guaranteed money on Kupp's deal yet or not. Yeah. So obviously this is cost dependent, right? He was asking for $15 million. I'm guessing Seattle is giving him close to that in order to get him to sign on the dotted line, but that's top line numbers, right? If he's making Here's the thing that I want fans to keep in mind is when you see the agent numbers, that top line, let's take Sam Darnold's 3 for 100. If Sam Darnold makes $100 million with the Seahawks, it's because he's been kicking ass.
Right.
And so he's going to be worth it. It's really 55 million with 45 in incentives if the team wants to take him all the way through 3 years and he's hitting, everything that is written into that contract. So if the guaranteed money is not crazy on Cooper Kupp, just like it wasn't crazy with DeMarcus Lawrence, I'm into it. It is interesting that they are bringing in a bunch of olds, right? Marquez Valdez-Scantling and DeMarcus Lawrence and Cooper Kupp. These are all guys on, over 30 years old, but they're good players. They know how to play football. And I do think that, again, with the eternal caveat of not being fucking atrocious on the offensive line,
we'll get to that.
This keeps them competitive. And I'm into that.
And I kind of feel like the roster needs a little bit of age. Like this, it's almost too young in certain spots, especially. Just in from Diana Rossini. She does say the deal, no terms yet, no structure, but the deal will be worth an average of $15 million a year. So a 3-year, $45 million deal. Yep. We'll just have to see how the guarantees stack up and how much of that is incentive based. But that's your agent number. Your agent number is going to be 3 for 45, which, just seems like a win-win. I mean, Seahawks need some experience at receiver and a guy with his skill set, and he gets to play a 90-minute drive away from where his family lives. So, good for everybody.
Well,
and they do it late on a Friday, which gives John Schneider probably at least the weekend to kind of escape the heat for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, man, this is awesome that it happened while we were on the air. I'm glad that this is the time that worked for us to do this show. Right. I was on Mina Kimes' show when they signed Sam Darnold. So any podcasters listening, you want the Seahawks to make a big time acquisition,
give me
a ring. I'll bring a free agent with me.
Well, before we talk about potential further acquisitions, maybe as soon as early next week, let's talk about DK Metcalf. This one felt different to me because it has been a topic of conversation for so long. Even going back to his last extension, there were quite a few in the fan base that thought, it might be, a little bit more valuable to trade him. He's always been a little bit of a polarizing figure just because, the weaknesses or the things that he lacks in his skill set are pretty well known. But, you and I are on the same page in one sense that we both really just valued what he brought to the table. It's a guy that I've been saying all along I wanted on the roster, but where you and I kind of differed in conversing on Twitter is I was a little bit more open to the idea of trading him because I just thought it made sense in some respects from a business standpoint. Third contracts for receivers, especially with his skill set, don't always work out great, and that's why if you look at the free agent receiver list right now, you see a bunch of big names in their early 30s that are still out there with no home. And so I felt like that's something that we've all were a little bit more prepared to accept. It's just that having it happen on the heels of Geno Smith and Tyler Lockett and everything else just kind of made it feel a little bit more emotional. Just kind of your overall take on how that went down and him going to Pittsburgh and just, the Seahawks moving on from DK Metcalf.
Yeah. Obviously I wish that he had signed an extension in Seattle. I think that would still have been the best thing for the Seahawks and more importantly, the best thing for Jacson. And I was super bummed. I was sitting on the couch with my wife, Paulina, when it happened. And she just looked over and she's like, what? She saw, I didn't even say anything. She just saw my face change. Mm-hmm. And I was like, the Seahawks just traded my favorite player. And she was like, oh no, I'm so sorry. She was a good sport about it. Yeah, I was surprised. I was sad. An additional 4 years, $132 million. I still haven't heard how much of that was guaranteed. I think that'll tell the real story on that contract. Right. It makes it a little bit easier to swallow. You get a mid-second in exchange. There's going to be a good player there at 52. It's like when we had Michael Sean Dugar on Cigar Thoughts a few weeks ago. He said something when we were kind of debating, whether we considered 2024 to be a successful season for the Seahawks. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about John Schneider. And to be clear, for those listening who maybe are not familiar with me, I've been a John Schneider defender for a long time. I have tried to, and most of the time been able to make an optimistic case for the moves that he's made. They haven't all worked out, of course.
Right.
But one of the things that I said to Dugar was, for the obvious struggles that Schneider has had with the offensive line, he's done pretty good with his trades. Obviously, some high profile misses, right? With of course, the Jimmy Graham trade didn't work out. Percy Harvin, Jamal Adams. Those are high risk moves that didn't work. He's crushed some other ones, but he's been really good at filling gaps with trades. And Dugar's response was, "I'll give you that. He's very good at filling the holes that he created." And I was like, yeah, that's a great way of putting it. So he created a giant hole with DK Metcalf, and DK coming out right, with the trade request right before we got the Geno news, makes me think he probably, especially since that request was coded within wants more quarterback stability.
Right.
That makes me think he probably knew they weren't going to get home with Geno and didn't want to stick around in a run first offense, not knowing who the quarterback was going to be. So that's fine. I didn't see it as an FU Seattle thing. It was time. Unfortunately, Steelers are going to be my second favorite team now. Like, is what it is.
Not the Raiders? Steelers?
I mean,
okay. All right.
Raiders right there too. I mean, I want to see one of the. I want to see one of those two teams for sure. DK is just my guy.
Well, and same, and it. In fact, and I know I can say this confidently because the way I structure it, like no one would ever be able to hack it. But like, he's in all my passwords. Let me just put it that way. Like this was like just like Bobby Wagner.
I love that.
And then I had to change it all. Yeah. So,
well, and the good news for me is, and I tweeted this is, Devin Witherspoon is DK Metcalf's spirit animal. So the torch is going to pass in terms of Jackson's favorite Seahawk pretty easily.
I will say this though, to your point, like some of the clarity that we've gotten in the last couple of days with John speaking on this issue and speaking, I think pretty transparently. I don't think it doesn't sound like there's anything they could have done to save that situation. The DK just decided for his career at this point in his life, time to move to another market. And there's not much you can do about that. So, it's tough. If of all the places he could go, Vegas and Pittsburgh were two that I think would have hurt the least just because he's going to look so badass in that Steelers uniform. Like,
he's gonna look so great. They're gonna sell so many jerseys, man.
Yeah,
I can't wait to see him and Pickens scrap for number 14.
Didn't he just announce yesterday he's going to be number 4 officially?
Oh, is he? I missed that. I missed that. That's gonna look cool too. Yeah, man. I just hope Steelers fans, like if you're listening to this because you're trying to get your DK hit, like I don't blame you. Just appreciate the things that guy does well. It got so exhausting over the last couple of years.
It did.
To have one of the coolest players. I'm not saying he's one of the best. I'm saying he's one of the coolest players who does really cool shit all the time. And to have people just be pissed at him all the time. Like, yeah, I might want to leave too. So Pittsburgh fans, appreciate him, man. Appreciate the things that he does great. Don't hyper focus on the things that he doesn't do as well. Because the good outweighs the bad.
Absolutely. But how much do you think that fan reaction or fan opinion plays into these guys' decisions? These guys are in tune. DK's all over social media. So is Geno. Some people are into it heavier than others. They definitely are. They hear, and I've said this for a long time. I think if you did polls, and sometimes you see polls, whether you like Geno or not, whether you like DK or not, stay or go, usually they're like 80% positive, which is about as much as you can ever expect in this day and age where we're all connected. It's just that the 20% was so loud and so obnoxious, and it gets to these guys. And you hear some things behind the scenes that maybe Geno didn't feel as supported by ownership. I've heard that from some people because they weren't willing to pay him more because they were afraid of fan backlash. DK certainly has heard all the criticism and heard local talk radio talking about trading him. At some point that wears on these guys, right? I mean, some of us fans forget that these guys are human beings and this means a lot to them.
Well, of course it does. They've been killing themselves to be the 1% of the 1% of the 1% to even be in a position where fans care about what they do. So yeah. And they have every right to be aware of, how people talk about them and factor that into their decisions. The idea that like ownership, didn't support Geno, or he didn't have the support of ownership, might very well be true. It's a little laughable to me because he saved their ass post Russell Wilson trade.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I mean, like at this point, it's one of the most lopsided trades in NFL history. Like Seahawks totally won that. 3 years later, the Broncos are building a freaking juggernaut, and Seattle feels directionless. So, I mean, even absolutely mopping the floor with the biggest trade in franchise history, you lost all the ground to that team already.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, kudos to the Broncos for pulling out of that. Like it took some decisiveness and some conviction to get that done. And that's how you do it. I thought of something earlier when you were talking about Schneider kind of covering up his own mistakes. I think it was Robert Mays yesterday on the football podcast on The Athletic that said, and I've heard this analogy before, but most recently it was him. He said that you can't give the arsonist credit for putting the fire out. Right? I
like that.
So we're 29 minutes into this conversation. We haven't talked offensive line yet, shall we?
Sure.
So, rather than rehash everything over the last week, the Will Fries thing is well documented at this point. I think most in the fan base, just because there's just so much anxiety, they want to know today, right? I understand the impatience. They want to know today that the biggest problem on the roster is being addressed. Everybody wanted them to then immediately pivot and just hand the money to somebody else. They're clearly being careful about this, but yet now we do know that the guy that's the pretty clear second choice among the fan base from everything I see, Tevin Jenkins from Chicago, is indeed coming to Seattle for a visit on Monday, which they wanted Fries to do for understandable reasons, coming off a really, really bad broken leg, which there still is no ETA for when he's going to return. There's been no timeline given by his agents that he'll be back in time for training camp or the regular season. And the Seahawks wanted to take a look at him themselves, get their doctors to look at him and do a physical. He didn't want to do it. He had another offer where they were willing to waive all of that. So, of course, he's going to take it. I mean, I don't blame Fries at all. Jenkins, a little bit different story. He's had more chronic injury issues, some back stuff throughout his career that's a little bit more concerning. But he's coming in Monday for a visit. Seahawks have a really good track record of getting people into the facility and closing the deal. How would you feel overall about the offensive line where it stands today if they were able to lock him up?
Better, a lot better. One of the things that I do want to say, Dan, is that I super appreciate the perspective you bring to the show and to social media and the interactions with the fans, because we agree on most things, but even when we disagree, you do a great job of really explaining where you're coming from. And I really respect that, because it forces me to, what are the reasons I like mixing it up on Twitter and Blue Sky with fans who disagree isn't because I want to squabble. It's because by doing that, it either strengthens or forces me to reevaluate the opinions that I have. It's real-time feedback on how I feel. And I don't go public with an opinion unless I've stress tested it internally, but there's always things I don't consider. And so you got to make a really good, strong point in order for me to pivot off of that. But I will pivot off of it if, that context is given. And I mention all of that to talk about Will Fries. I obviously really wanted them to sign him. I was very open about that. When I heard how it went, like I work in real estate, and if you're writing an offer that has an inspection contingency and you're competing against another offer that is waiving inspection, the seller is going to take the one where they're waiving inspection. And of course, Fries is going to go. They're like, you're just going to give me the money without like making sure? Sure, that's fine. My frustration is 10 years of being unable to build a decent offensive line puts you in a position where you have to try and go get Will Fries, where you have to try and go get Tevin Jenkins or Drew Dahlman. So it's not that I think these guys are like the saviors. It's that you painted yourself into this corner where now you have to do that, because outside of using top 10 picks on Charles Cross and Russell Okung, you haven't drafted any offensive linemen that are any good, John.
Yeah.
And so the reason that I want them to sign Tevin Jenkins and that I wanted them to sign Freeze or Dahlman or maybe trade for Eric McCoy from the Saints isn't because I think these guys are so amazing. It's that they've proven to be competent and better than any interior offensive line players that Seattle has had in a decade. And it doesn't force you to then use all of your draft capital that you just acquired on rookies in front of a highly pressure sensitive quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you on that one. I kind of use the analogy that, some of the similar angst that we're feeling about the offensive line have for a long time. We were feeling that a few years ago about the defensive line. Like they just could never get ahead. They were always playing catch up. They were always having to make, the Carlos Dunlap type moves to try to slap things together. And that's what ended up ultimately leaving them in the position where they had to go give up some pretty significant draft capital and pay a bunch of money to get Leonard Williams in, and then draft Murphy the next year and then kind of get out in front of it with that position group. It feels like that's where they are right now, that it's too young. There's too much youth, and I've used that as part of my argument to push back against fans that say, we need to throw the entire group out. There's been a lot of draft picks spent on that group. And I do think
I like the defensive line.
Defensive line. I'm back talking about the offensive line.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yes,
there's just so many young guys. And I think a lot of them have upside. It's just that trying to figure all that at the same time, we talk about the Philadelphia Eagles and we talk about the Detroit Lions. Well, they have a couple of stud veterans and then they can sprinkle guys in. That's how they can pick up a Mekhi Becton off the scrap heap and stick him in between Cam Jurgens and Lane Johnson. Mm-hmm. And he looks so good because you have that foundation.
They also have great offensive line coaches.
And that's where I feel better now than at any point really over the last 6 or 7 years. I feel like they made a concerted effort and were very deliberate about this process. It was a little frustrating to follow it. We wanted answers, right? But this staff they've put together on offense and all the experience and the accomplishments and the resume of John Benton and Rick Dennison and Justin Outen and all these guys that have direct ties, not to Clint Kubiak, but to Gary Kubiak and Mike Shanahan. How much more confidence does that give you that maybe they can take these pieces and figure out where to put them, how to use them, and how to coach them up?
I mean, I'll believe it when I see it at this point,
Fair.
right? Scott Huff
We've been promised this before, right? We thought,
Tom Cable was the best offensive line coach in the NFL. Scott Huff was the best offensive line coach in college football. I'll believe it when I see it. I am not going to talk myself into a good Seattle offensive line until I see a good Seattle offensive line, because I haven't seen it in over a decade.
Right. Do you think that they're in a position where things are so bleak still, or maybe bleak's not the right word, because I do think there's a lot of talent with those young guys, uncertain, that signing a guy like Garrett Bradbury makes sense because he has the history in Kubiak's system with Kubiak. He has the 1 year with Sam Darnold. Apparently they're very close. He probably would be pretty cheap. He has the first round pedigree, but he hasn't been that good of a player over the last 4 years. He's been a 5-year starter, but he's kind of been the weak link of that offensive line all the way through. And there's a reason they moved off of him. Do you still think it makes sense in some way to get a guy like that, even though, fans are going to look at his PFF grades and go, that?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Why not? I don't know. Like, he's not a player that's moving the needle for me at all, because building the interior line out of cheap parts, late day 2 picks, day 3 picks, 3rd, 4th wave free agents hasn't worked. Like, just fail different, John. Fail different, because you've been failing the same way for 10 years.
I like that. Yeah, that's good. Let's finish with this. One of my favorite things ever, and I think it was back when you and I first started talking, but your reaction last year or 2 years ago to the Jackson Smith-Njigba selection, right? He was a guy that you had been campaigning for. He was your biggest draft crush and your most commonly mocked player at 20 that entire draft process, despite the fact that fans hated the idea of taking a wide receiver in the first round. And then you were live streaming, doing a watch party during the draft. And when he was taken, you reacted accordingly.
I did.
Do you have any similar crushes this year that would make you react the same way, given that it's 5 weeks out but a guy that if they took at 18, you would feel similarly.
Yeah, I don't think he'll be there, but I have seen him fall that far in some mocks from, some not like the fan mocks, although I do love the ones that you do and post on Twitter, because I like that you try out a lot of different things to see how it fits. But I'm talking about like, the Dane Bruglers and the Rapports and whatever. If Tyler Warren is there at 18, then I would be extremely into that, because I think you are helping your blocking. And for those unaware, he's tight end out of Penn State. Just stud. We always compare to the really good players because those are recognizable names. So I'm not saying this is who he's going to be. I am saying this is a shades of comparison, a play style skill set comparison. He is a George Kittle type tight end. You can line him up in line. You can get him into the slot. He moves extremely well. He played quarterback at times for Penn State. Yeah, they were running jet sweeps to this dude like Georgia did with Brock Bowers. He's got tremendous hands, and he can run away from people. He appears to be a very, very special player. And I believe that in the first round, with a few positional exceptions, you don't draft for need nearly as much as you should take the best player available. You fill needs on day 2, and then you hope that someone from day 3 hits. But if you can get a really good player at a position of need, a Byron Murphy, a Jackson Smith-Njigba, right? Oh, we don't need a wide receiver. You do now. Yeah. 2 years later. Like, how happy are you that you have Jackson Smith-Njigba now and that he already has 2 years of growth underneath him? So, yeah, take the best player that's there. Nick Emawari is a player that's super fun. He's safety out of South Carolina. I kind of had him circled as at like that pick 50 range. I would be pretty excited. But then he went and had the best combine of any player at any position in history. So I think if you want him, you're gonna have to take him at 18 or like trade down from 18 or something to get him. He would be super fun in a way that like DK Metcalf was super fun. Like, look at this freak. I don't think he's like a super fluid safety. You'd have to make him more of like a box style safety. Yeah. I think he struggles in coverage, moving backwards, that kind of thing. But he'd be another one that would be like at least very, very fun.
Yeah. I mean, and it could end up being a very, very similar feel to 2023 in the sense that, the way that this class sort of shapes out and the way that it seems like everyone's going to go try and emulate what the Eagles are doing now. And it's a good trench draft. And so let's lean into that the most at the top of the draft. That I see a lot of scenarios where you get to 18 and no one's touched the wide receiver position again. And that you could be looking up at your board and wide receiver 1 is there. And it could feel very, very similar to 2023 if they were to go with a Matthew Golden or a Mecca Buka or somebody like that. So
yeah. There are receivers I like in this draft for sure. It sounds like there are teams that are cooling on Tataroa McMillan. Obviously he would be at the top of my board. I think he's like a special wide receiver, but I think some team,
especially now with Kupp in the fold, like you talk about complementary pieces, like McMillan's game would seem to fit in really well and offer him something that they just don't have.
Well, he's a boundary X receiver. He reminds me a lot of T. Higgins and build, strengths, the way that he wins. I'd say he's like 90% of T. Higgins, 95% of T. Higgins. That's a good first round pick if that's what you get. So I'd like him. I think Matthew Golden is interesting. I don't think he's like a true 4-2 player, like watching him on the field, but he is very fast and polished. It's not a John Ross 4-2. This is a guy that runs really. He's closer to like an Xavier Worthy type of speedster. So yeah, I could get on board with that pretty quickly. Mecca Buka is like the pros pro receiver coming out of this class, another Ohio State guy. I'd be fine with those two, I think.
Are there, you've made your feelings about the quarterback class as a whole well known. Is there anyone that piques your interest though? Are there any of those guys in that group that you like enough that if they took a shot on a guy round 3 or 4 that you'd be intrigued by? That's a long pause.
No.
Okay.
I mean, is Jackson Dart gonna fall to the 80th pick? Like,
no.
Sure, let's do that, but that
No,
ain't happening.
What?
I'm not interested in Milrow. I'm not interested in. I mean, Shadur's. I don't want to use the 18th pick on Shador Sanders. I think Shador will probably be a fine pro. I'm not like anti Shador Sanders, but like you've got a hopefully fine quarterback already. I don't want to draft like, oh, I hope this guy is like fine, Sam Howell, Drew Lock type of player. I want to hold out for a difference-making quarterback, and I just don't see that outside of potentially Cam Ward in this draft class.
I do feel like there's been a pretty seismic shift for me in the timeline now, moving to Sam Darnold. I think if you had signed Geno to that deal that reportedly they offered, which would be a 2-year extension, I imagine tacked onto this year as opposed to tearing this year up. I think then we would be sitting here talking about who to aggressively target, because you'd want to do the Jordan Love thing. I think at that point, just given Geno's age, but going to a guy like Darnold, who's 27, and if you can make this offense functional, I could see him going either way. I could see him taking a Jackson Dart at 18 if he fell that way, because I think he exhibits the checklist of everything John Schneider loves in quarterbacks. I could see them passing on the position yet again altogether. I think that range has really widened now with Darnold in the fold. So
yeah, yep, I agree. It feels like drafting a quarterback this year is forcing the issue, and I don't think you should ever force the issue at quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. All right, man. Can't wait. I wish the draft was here today.
I know.
But great to get caught up with you, and I'm just glad you're okay and you stepped away from the ledge and do what you always do, which is lend perspective to the wide angle view. Right.
I'm happy for the opportunity. I love what you got going on. I really, really appreciate the perspective that you bring to Seahawks fans and the depth with which you go into each aspect of the team and their opportunity. So thank you for doing that, and for letting me be a part of it, letting me be a part of the Cooper Kupp acquisition. And I love that you mentioned the Robert Mays quote while we were talking, because we're going to have him on the show next week. So nice. We'll have Robert Mays on Cigar Thoughts next week. So those listening, be on the lookout for that. And I'll be really, really curious to hear what he has to say.
If you don't already subscribe to Cigar Thoughts, what is wrong with you? Get over there and do it right now. And then same thing for, I've just recently, I don't know where what rock I was hiding under, but just recently became a regular listener of that football podcast on The Athletic and during the combine. And Robert just does such an incredible next level job. I was going to say, put a good word in for me with him.
I will.
But,
I will.
I think I might be a little too intimidated to talk to Robert. I don't know.
Oh, you'll be fine.
I was intimidated talking to you the first time, and look how that turned out. So we're all good. All right, Jackson. I appreciate you. Yeah, we'll talk again soon, man.
All right, later, bro.
Well, how about this for the comments? Yay or nay, you're going to buy a Cooper Kupp jersey, number 10, Jim Zorn's number being resurrected. It's regardless. Let me know, what you think of the whole thing, right? There's obviously going to be some concerns about the injury history. But just what a fun signing. When was the last time the Seahawks made a signing like this that just was so much fun? Like if you're from the Pacific Northwest and you're a Seahawks fan, you've watched Cooper Kupp's entire journey from Eastern Washington to the Rams. I remember when the Rams drafted him, it was right before the Seahawks were going to pick, and I wanted him to be the guy. Like I was a believer in him. And then every single year of his career, I tried to get him in fantasy football and never could. And now he gets to be a Seahawk. I'm super excited about it. Let me know if you are as well. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Seahawks Forever. Tune in to Pulse of the Draft tonight. Here, let me put this up real quick. Bryce Coots and I will be taking a look at the AFC West. And we're each taking 2 teams, breaking down draft needs, and then doing a full mock draft. So you draft nerds are going to want to check that out and join us over there tonight at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. Until then, forever and always go Hawks. Thanks for watching, you guys.